Hello, welcome everybody. Thank you for coming out tonight. My name is Kimberly Datchik, and I'm the Curator of Learning and Engagement here at the Stanley Museum of Art. And we're excited to have you here for our Grant Wood Fellows Conversation and Artist Talks. We have refreshments and beverages, so please help yourself at any point. On the screen, you'll see the University of Iowa Land Acknowledgement. It recognizes that land we are on right now used to belong to other people and to many different indigenous tribes. They and their ancestors had lived here for thousands of years before European and American settlers arrived. As settlers arrived, they took land away from the indigenous people. We are working to make up for the wrongs done in the past in the way we reach out to indigenous communities and work with them. These communities have a long and rich history, and they continue to thrive in Iowa today. Please join me for a moment of reflection as I read the University of Iowa Acknowledgement of Land and Sovereignty. The University of Iowa is located on the homelands of the Ojibwe, Anishinaabe, Chippewa, Pohoji, Iowa, Chickapew, Kickapoo, Ometmanewak, Menominee, Miamia, Miami, Natuchi, Missouri, Omaha, Omaha, Wazaji, Osage, Jiware, Oto, Ottawa, Ottawa, Ponca, Ponca, Potawatomi, Neshnabay, Potawatomi, Meskwaki, Namahaki, Sakawaki, Sac and Fox, Dakota, Lakota, Nakota, Sioux, Sanish, Nubeka, Nueta, 3 affiliated tribes, and Ho-Chunk Winnebago nations. The following tribal nations: Omaha tribes of Nebraska and Iowa, Ponca tribe of Nebraska, Meskwaki, Sac and Fox of the Mississippi and Iowa, and Ho-Chunk Winnebago tribe of Nebraska nations continue to thrive in the state of Iowa, and we continue to acknowledge them. As an academic institution, it is our responsibility to acknowledge the sovereignty and the traditional territories of these tribal nations and the treaties that were used to remove these tribal nations and the history of dispossession that have allowed for the growth of this institution since 1847. Consistent with the university's commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, understanding the historical and current experiences of Native peoples will help inform the work we do, collectively as a university, to engage in building relationships through academic scholarship, collaborative partnerships, community service, enrollment and retention efforts, acknowledging our past, our present, and future Native nations. Tonight's program will include artist talks by the 3 Grant Wood Fellows, and then they'll join me in conversation discussing their work, and we'll open up the floor to questions from the audience. Our first speaker is Shea Hembrey. He's the Grant Wood Fellow in Painting and Drawing. His work questions reality. He seriously explores our best current understanding of the structure of reality while simultaneously playing trickster. He routinely fictionalizes both in making and presenting art. Sometimes he twists identity. He has invented over 100 fictional artists and made work for them. And sometimes he uses trompe-l'oeil techniques and masterful realistic paintings. Recent projects grapple with understanding our actual reality of rapidly unfolding environmental disasters. Physically, this focus includes making environmentally beneficial paints, turning ash into art material, and mass tree plantings for future projects. Hembrey approaches art by concentrating on a singular, defined conceptual project where the ideas direct what methods and media he uses. Research is key to his creative endeavors. Though always focused on developing new technical skills on his own, he has a very formal art education. His 9 years of studying art at university includes a year spent studying Maori art in New Zealand and an MFA from Cornell University. Please help me welcome Shea Hembrey.
Okay, can you hear if I do that, or do I need to hold it? Seems okay? All right, thanks for coming out. I'm going to kind of be a wandering, blabbering idiot probably, because this is all work that's new for me. Everything's, even the ideas, just go back to the summer. And it's been a good time for me to experiment. So I'm just going to talk about what I've been experimenting with since I've been here. And there's 2 projects, main projects, and I'll talk about them both. The first one is indoor studio paintings, and I'll be having a show at Andamendieta Gallery in April in VAB, and I'll talk about those briefly. And pretty much all semester was doing technical tests for those, and I'm launched into painting those now. And they're paintings with me really thinking a lot about climate change and how climate disaster, especially like with Lahaina and the recent floods in Libya, just wiped out cities, right? And how this is going to increasingly happen, how culture will be obliterated because of our climate change that we've unleashed. And I'm sitting in the studio. This first set came about of thinking about the little world, the little archival world of a painting, because normally I make my own frames, and they're usually like a 3/4 inch oak spacer, so there's that little gap, this little world, and I was thinking about that thumb depth of a world, and what if climate change affected that little sliver, like a little terrarium. So, and especially it was starting to colonize the work and take over the work or obscure the work. So mold was either starting to eat away at the piece or cover the piece, and condensation either obscured the piece or partly destroyed the piece. So this is, there's two pieces that I've started to frame and started to play with this, so I've included some examples of that. And this one, it's really 3 paintings essentially. I do a traditional painting as if it was framed, and there's the traditional painting, and then it's on a mat board, and then on the mat board, mold and mildew is starting to grow. And then on the inside of the glass of the frame is water droplets. That's all just droplets of acrylic paint. So like it was a week of just painting droplets on this one, and you can see it's really hard to tell without seeing them in person. And you can see past it to see the painting, but you really have to move around a lot. And I really like how nature is totally obscuring the piece, the painting. And in this one, how when moisture first happens, it's all frosty. It's all like foggy. And if things get close to the glass, you can see it clearly, but just, half an inch away, it's really hard to see and distinguishes what's going on. So those two just kind of give a glimpse of what's technically going on. It's really hard to see without seeing it in person, but that's my teaser for those paintings. Yeah. Okay, so my other project, which has also been a lot about my thoughts about climate change, is I guess late spring last year, there was an NPR story about that when the new study was released that we should be anticipating to lose 2/3 of our songbirds in the next 2 decades because of habitat loss, and that just really stuck with me, and I was thinking about it over the summer, and I started working on a project of replanting habitat for bird species. So I was thinking, how can I do this as an art project? And so I was thinking, well, I can do plantings that would benefit that bird. So either it's something the bird nests in, or it's habitat that they use for cover, or it's something that they eat. And each time I do a planting, I can do put soil supplements, which would help the planting. So every time I do this, I have to test the soil and figure out what the soil needs. So if I need to change the pH, then that means there's going to be either sulfur to make it more acidic or lime to make it less acidic. And so it's a mix of a lot of things as I go to do this, thinking about what are the birds that needs more habitat, and then as I test the soil in each spot where a plant's going to go, what does that soil need? And then it tells me, okay, maybe I can do this type of planting, maybe can do this type of planting. In this case, it's a northern mockingbird, and the way I go about these is, first the pigments that are going to happen, I call them pigments, but it's soil supplements. They tell me what I'm going to do, and then I make a rough stencil for them. So that's a stencil of a circle essentially, and like the 6 stripes at the top. And then as I use sifters, it's like flour sifters for baking, and I have different sizes. So if it's detail, I use those. So then what happens is the next day, usually a dew falls, and it completely looks different the next day. And then after a few rains, and after it absorbs, I plant a tree, or it could be a bush, or it could be prairie grass, depending on what the need is. And that's just a detail. Every time I've done them, within minutes, bugs are walking across them and leaving tracks, so it's really funny to watch how fast it just starts falling apart. This one's a northern flicker. And that's after 2 rains. And then that's a white oak sapling planted on that spot. And planting smaller trees makes it easier because it's not a lot of maintenance. You know, I can put a little bit of mulch in, because it's not something, especially in mass plantings, that you can tend to a lot. I've planted over 10,000 trees in the last 5 years, and not a lot of them have I done a lot of maintenance on. It's not manageable for one person, especially a busy person. Let's see. This one is a wood thrush. This one's a brown thrasher. And this one's a bobolink. So I'll be doing this project in several locations in Cedar Rapids and Iowa City in April, May, June, and July. And as we're getting permission for places for this to happen, so I'm about to learn a lot about Iowa birds. I roughly kind of know, but not really, because I'm a native Arkansan and I know that so really well, especially my part of. But there is a lot of overlap, and it'll be a lot of me questioning, okay, what is the summer range? What is winter range? So I've got to spend a lot of time with my Audubon books and just looking at range maps in the coming weeks and starting to pick out birds and what birds need habitat, and what times of year and what should that look like. This one's a black and white warbler. So I've worked with birds for many years. I got my first chickens when I was 5. That was a family tradition. When you're 5, you get your first birds. And then I had finches, and I had parakeets. And then by the time I was 15, I was driving the U.S. Department of the Interior crazier because I wanted a license to be a breeder of migratory waterfowl. And so eventually they gave it to me at 18. I think you're supposed to be like 21. And I had a business in my teenage and early adult years, and I sold birds to zoos around the country. I remember, and my parents were great about letting me. They're like, "Sure, if you want to raise the money, there's land on the farm. You can." So I built aviaries that you could walk in. You know how there's batting cages with that netting. So there were trees inside, and I would be up at 6 o'clock in the morning before school, usually out there working, especially if it was cold with ice. And I forget about that life, kind of. That was a pre-art life, And then someone mentioned the other day, like, remember when your parents let you and your best friend go to that zoo auction when we were in high school? And I was like, yeah, they let us go out of state to a zoo auction. But it was so awesome when we got that. They literally auctioned off elephants, and that was a really great, you forget about these things that you've done. But I've always had that passion for birds. Originally, I thought I was going to be an ornithologist, and biology was my strength. All the sciences were all my strength in school, and I started undergrad, and my second semester, I took a painting class, and I was like, you can study this? Because I hadn't had art since 6th grade, and it just never seemed like something you could do. But after taking a formal art class, I was like, oh, no, this is it. So I took that direction. And anyway, my original plan was to spend time get my PhD at Cornell, because I'd seen all these amazing photographs of the ornithology lab at Cornell and the collections. So I ended up going there for my MFA, and I got to spend 2 years in the collection. And I got to handle passenger pigeons, and they just, they let me just do whatever I wanted to there, which was such great fun with the specimens. And I spent a lot of that time doing nesting work. And so thinking about this, what shape do they need to have in a skull? It has to either be an egg form or a round form. And I think a round form feels right. And yeah. So the other, beyond these round ones, this one's an orchard oriole. This is actually a bird that we did not have growing up, but we've had in the last few years on our farm in Arkansas. And it's part of all the tree planting is really, we're starting to see different things come in. And this one's a grass section, so instead of it being a specific bird, it's, I think about what the birds are and then plant a native grass plot that is a combination of their patterns. And that's an up-close detail. So these are all right immediately after install, and then that's the next morning. So you can see there's already starting to be some cracking after one dew, and then you can see the bird prints. I'm pretty amazed. Almost every time, second day, there's birds have been walking around on them, which I find really surprising because, you know, it's such a specific spot, right? It's just a 30-inch, you know, round circle. Anyway, I've spent a lot of the last few years just thinking, what can you do in the face of climate change, especially as an artist, especially, you know, in a way you're preaching to an audience who cares usually. And so what can you do that physically does make change? So this is a project where I was thinking, okay, this is a physical act that I can do. And it also, for me, feels a bit shamanistic of like, you know, every time I plant a tree, I've planted trees since I was tiny too. And I've always said a prayer every time I plant a tree, like, grow well, I love you, know, all these, you know, this little chant that happens. And anyway, without realizing it, I mean, I was doing it with this project too. It's this, you know, just this thing of, you know, I always think of prayer as hope sent outside your body. So it's that, you know, it's a prayer too of like, okay, let's fix this, you know, let's make whatever small steps we can to fix it. And I do recommend, you know, I can say from 5 years of tree planting, like it was a great act under the Trump era of something that you could do out in the world that got you away from the craziness. And it was a nature act and a physical act. And I'm hoping I'm not going to have that. That's not going to be a reason for another launch. But, you know, I feel like I need to do I need to be the America's first lady in my, you know, it's my city, Ladybird, Beautify America. That's, you know, that's plants for butterflies and this plant for birds. Yeah, it's something every community can do, every backyard, you know, medians of highways. There's tons of unused space, and it can, you know, it can also be permaculture that, you know, people can eat. Besides, you know, lots of it could be things that we could be harvesting as well. All right, I hope that gives you some thing to ask me questions by. As you can tell, it's all nebulous in my head. It's weird to start talking about it, especially from work when I think about, like, I haven't been thinking about this since, you know, usually I think about years or something, you know, a couple years or something, and then I start to work on it. So all of it's very fresh for me, and if you have good questions that will help me, please ask them. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Shea. Our next speaker is Jessica Tucker. Jessica is the Grant Wood Fellow in Performance Theater. She is an American-Dutch artist, musician, and educator. Her work playfully examines how media technologies substantiate the shifting dimensions of selfhood and the body, and thereby condition experiences of agency and identity. She creates multimedia performances, videos, and installations that restage everyday virtual activities as complex embodiments that reveal and distort our deepest desires. Using advanced and quotidian contemporary media technologies, she poetically reframes the vain and the mundane into immersive, ritual-like experiences that speak to our longing for connection while confronting dominant mechanisms of attention, manipulation, self-commodification, and surveillance capitalism. Inspired by media technology histories, as well as diverse spiritual and scientific definitions of consciousness and individuality, she explores cracks in machines as in humans, looking at how our shared slippage reconcile meaning in the midst of what feels like entropy. Tucker holds an MFA from the School of Art Institute of Chicago, where she has taught in the film, video, new media, and animation department. She previously studied at Wellesley College, MIT, and the Garrett Rietveld Academy. She has performed and exhibited her work throughout Europe and the USA, including Rewire Festival, Faux Museum of Photography, Goethe Institute, the Van Gogh Museum, and Mana Contemporary. She has been supported by the Chicago Artists Coalition, DK's Tama Foundation, Mondrian Fund, Amsterdam Fund for the Arts, and Prince Bernhard Culture Fund. Please help me welcome Jessica Tucker.
I'm just going to start a timer so I can keep track. Hi, everyone. I'm Jessica Tucker. Thank you for the introduction. This might be a bit messy. This is all very live, the work that I'm going to share. I'm going to start off by showing kind of what I came in with, and then show you how the research has unfolded so far, and where it's heading for a couple of shows that are coming up. So just to contextualize, I think a lot about what a feedback loop is. And so what is a feedback loop? When we think about feedback, not in terms of like giving feedback to somebody, but of like that high-pitched squeal you hear when a microphone is too close to a speaker, right? That's due to a feedback loop, which is basically when you have an input going into a processor, coming out of an output, and then some of that output or all of that output is coming back in to the input. So you get this loop. And the high-pitched sound comes from too much of the same thing, right? So why am I thinking about that? This is a little model of how that works for a visual representation. In P, I'm not sure what the P stands for in this diagram, but processor, perhaps. Could be a machine, could be a mirror. A feedback loop creates a situation of infinity. So this is an image of Ouroboros, the mythical snake that is eating itself. So there's a kind of self-cannibalization to a feedback loop, that it's repeating itself, it's eating itself and repeating itself. This is an image of Narcissus by Caravaggio. As you can see, it's in the shape of a loop. This self-reflection of looking at one's own image in a mirror is also a kind of feedback loop, right, between your own eyes and your eyes in the reflection. The input goes back in after coming out of the output. So my thinking about this is also founded in the history of video art. There was a piece written by Rosalind Krauss in the 70s about the advent of video art and what video artists were kind of making of the medium, what was essential to the medium, and how were they interpreting that. And what she observes is that there's a kind of collapsed present that happens. You have a recording of the very recent past, sort of like it's not the past, it's now, and it's coming through a camera. And with a video monitor, you could plug the camera directly into the monitor so that you have instant feedback, right? It's not film. You don't have to send it off to get processed in order to see your image. So the video monitor becomes this kind of mirror, and it's a circuit where you have the input of the camera, output to the screen. And what a lot of artists were doing at that time was placing themselves in the middle of the camera and the screen to create a feedback loop and seeing themselves in that mediated image. Okay, so this is a piece by Namjoon Paik, where we have the Buddha sitting in contemplation of himself via the video monitor with the live feed of the camera coming through. Okay. So it's not only about narcissism as a sort of self-obsession, but it's this model of self-contemplation as well, of awareness and of being with your own image. So what am I doing about that? We're past the advent of video art. We're now in a very digital age and dealing with platforms like social media and dealing with these phones in our pockets, which have cameras on them and that are connected to everyone all the time. So what I've done to create my own sort of self-cannibalization of this narcissistic feedback loop diagram is to collect my own selfies over time. I have many at this point. And using these face filter apps that do face swapping, it's called. And these are based on algorithms that track faces, right? And that kind of technology is applied in all kinds of ways that are highly problematic. But we have a lot of fun with it, those of us who use social media, to add strange distortions to our face. And the face swapping filter, it does what it sounds like. It swaps one face with another one. So it just has to see two faces in order to make this swap. So I pull up my selfies on screen and point my phone at the screen and swap them. And it does okay, but as you can see, some weird things happen. And it makes me think, like, what is this image now? We're very used to selfies and putting them out there, and that they function in a certain way. They're associated with a certain sort of self-expression, or perhaps self-obsession, depending on how you look at this phenomena. But they're also used, of course. There are machines and algorithms set up to process that information, to see our face, to recognize our face, and to track us over time, and to pair this data with everything else we express about ourselves online. Okay, so I've made a bunch of these faces, these new distorted versions of myself. And the question is, what are these? Are they me? Are they something else? How would the machine interpret this? Like, the machine is already clearly very confused about how this face is oriented. It struggles. It can't tell if it is a face sometimes. So you get all these distortions and slippages. And what does it mean? What does it mean to distort a face like this? What is the face? What does the face mean? So throughout history, there have been a lot of different thoughts about the meaning of the face. So for instance, there's this idea that the face is a sacred, pure thing. This comes from religion, generally. That's been a cultural value in the West for a long time. The face, coming from science, the face would be a form that we recognize above all others as humans, that we've evolved to care about faces, to see faces, that there's something about our social survival that depends on being able to recognize faces. And in philosophy, there's this, Emmanuel Levinas writes about how the face is the threshold of the encounter between the self and other, right? That it's this very sort of essential interface of the self and the other self over there. So when we look eye to eye, when we are face to face with each other, that we're having this pivotal encounter. And then we have Deleuze and Guattari. I'm not going to go deep into this, but they have a theory that the face is simultaneously a white wall, a surface for something to be projected on, or a black hole, a sort of entrance into infinity or an abyss. Okay, so here's another example of distorted faces or difficult to interpret faces in history. These images are pulled from an exhibition that took place in Germany in 1937. And this was shortly after the publishing of Paul Schultz-Naumburg's book Art and Race, or Kunst und Rasse. And basically his claim was that modernist art, which we can see on the left, is the result of degeneration and corruption of the northern races. That this new art form was not good, and it was problematic, needed to be done away with, right? That this was insulting or degrading the sanctity of the face, and a certain kind of face, right? Like a northern Aryan face. And they set up an exhibition called Degenerate Art, where they put these artworks next to pictures of people who had different kinds of deformities to their face due to injury or birth defect or some other ailment or disability, which of course were people who were targeted during the Holocaust as well, to purify the race, right? So highly political moment for distorted faces of like, what does it mean? Who is threatened by this? And what counts as a face? What counts as a good face, a pure face? What faces should be welcome in the world? So me using my face as like a kind of feedback loop to distort and deconstruct itself through this hyper-accumulation, hyper-mediation, is a way of refusing that order, of refusing a face that would satisfy certain categories. what a face should be, and to challenge the machine that's set up to detect that face through space and time. So this is like a feedback loop. And this is what I came in with, kind of thinking about technology and its relation to the self, and to the face and the body, and like what kind of interactions I could set up to distort that boundary, distort this definition of self and what counts, and when I'm present, when I'm real, when I'm not. Okay, so a little bit more feedback. This is a performance piece that I made in the fall called Possession, where I'm taking various faces that I've made through this process and creating my own AR, augmented reality filters that I can then wear live in a performance. There's a tripod there with a face tracking mount on it, so that thing rotates as I move around, and it has my phone on it, which is got a camera feed open, feeding into my laptop where I'm running this AR application that will apply this face to me or wherever it sees a face, right? So it sees a face on me, and it also sees a face in this infinite feedback hallway that happens behind me, right? Because the camera is pointed at a projection. We have this input-output feedback going on again. So I'll just play a little excerpt of that performance. Okay. I also have a profession as a musician, which I'm not going to go super into in this presentation, but I've been dealing with noise and feedback and been a big part of like noise DIY communities for a long time. So that is also, the feedback component is coming into the music as well there, and looping the voice. Okay, so that was at the beginning of my time here in Iowa. The other thing I've been very busy with while I'm here is working in the motion capture studio that the theater department has. It's pretty fun. And motion capture, just to briefly explain what that is using sensors placed on a suit that you're wearing, and using cameras to track the location of those sensors in order to produce like a data representation of the movement of the body through space, which you can then remap onto avatar bodies, or you could use the numbers to drive all kinds of things. Someone in the audience is doing some really cool things with sound as well, using that data. But basically the program that does the motion capture, it's called Motive, and it looks like this when you're doing the recording. And I've been thinking about like, okay, how do I challenge machinic vision of the self? And in this case, it's a bodily representation rather than a facial representation. But how do I challenge this system that wants to see me. It wants to know where I am, and it's convinced that it can, right? How do I push it to its limits? So I've been doing some experiments there. This is a recording of me climbing out of the space where the cameras can see me. So you can imagine there's a kind of virtual edge right there that I'm about to cross. Okay, and as I cross, the system can't see these points so well, so it starts to lose sense of the body. This is not what my body is actually doing. But it's trying really hard to keep this body together with what little information it has, right? And then eventually, it just gives up. Okay? I am okay, as you can see. I made it out of this. Okay, so I rendered this out in a few different ways. I mapped these faces onto these virtual bodies and set them up to look like they're trying to escape from the screen as they cross this invisible flat wall, and the machine loses them. And you can see that invisible flat wall is sort of cutting into the body, the way I set it up. So this is a piece, there's 4 videos to it, and it is installed all together. It's called discoordinate. So the motion capture system is based on a Cartesian space of XYZ coordinates, and this is discoordinate, of losing the coordinates, becoming discoordinated. Okay, this is another experiment. So those white dots are actually the sensors, but the motion capture software is determined to keep the body together, right? So it's like, that must not be where the body is. It's over here. I'll explain in a second what's actually going on here with these 2 bodies. This is me and my dance partner, we lovingly named Henry for the day, who is a bunch of cloth wrapped in a motion capture suit. He was spilling out of himself many times, but I danced around, interacted with this rag doll who was very heavy in the end, and the motion capture you saw in the previous slide, that's what came out of it. And I'm still playing with that in video to see how I can render it in different ways. This is one render I've made so far of that same recording. Okay, so I'm going to bring up another concept that's related to feedback, at least in the sound world, and that is noise. The texture that is filling in both of these bodies here is a digitally generated noise. What is noise? Noise is generally associated with like a loud, unpleasant sound, a disturbance, But technically, it's irregular fluctuations that accompany a transmitted signal, but are not a part of the signal and tend to obscure it. So it's that extra stuff that we want to filter out. It's also randomness. Like the mathematical equations for noise are producing random numbers, and according to certain spreads of those values. So noise is the antithesis of information. It's the opposite of pattern. So it's difficult to decipher. These are the noise textures. These are a few different visual noise renders. The one on the bottom is white noise. It's random. Every pixel is a random value between 0 and 1 of black or white. And the others are examples of fractal noise, also known as Perlin noise, which is used for many things, and it's observed in many natural biological processes. But in motion graphics and visual effects, like digitally generated CGI, that kind of stuff, it is essential for creating many kinds of things, including clouds, water, land. It was famously used in Star Trek, The Wrath of Khan in 1982. This was the first realistic landscape made using digitally generated noise. And today we have artificial intelligence machine learning processes, like Stable Diffusion is one of the most advanced ones now, which uses a process of taking images and translating them into noise, diffusing them into noise, like a drop in a bucket of water, and then training a machine to predict how much noise is in an image in order to extract new images out of noise. This is like a very basic explanation of how this stuff goes, and I'm not a computer scientist, but this is basically how Stable Diffusion works. So I started experimenting with training my own Stable Diffusion model on my face images that I'd been making, and I've been getting really interesting outputs from that. So these are generated by the model that was trained on my images. These as well. And then I'm creating videos using digitally generated noise to modulate those images, hypermediating, using noise to distort. I find it so interesting with video. It's so hard to see process in video, and I'm really interested in the meaning of these processes, of like, what does it mean to use noise? What does it mean to use AI to create different versions of myself? And how can I keep working to make that visible, even if you don't like deeply comprehend the technicalities of it, but that you can see some things. So this is a render of that, of just the noise that I used to make the cutouts of those faces, and to modulate their motion. So this is just like 5 layers of digitally generated noise that I've set different parameters on, of like how fast it will go, how big it will be. Okay, here's another one. I'll wrap it up real quick. What is this? Does this remind you of anything? A lava lamp, yeah? Cool, that's good. So, does anybody know what this is? Yeah? Do you know what it is?
No, sorry, I just got excited.
Oh, okay. So this is a lava lamp wall at Cloudflare, which is a company in San Francisco that handles online encryption. So it turns out that noise is something that we want to filter out of a signal to get a clear message, but it's also something essential for creating secure information. And as you can see in Stable Diffusion, we need the noise to make the system more accurate. Cloudflare uses this lava lamp wall with a camera pointed at it to supply random numbers in order to better encrypt their information. It's what otherwise, like, a computer cannot generate actual randomness. It's always computational, so it's dependent on some algorithm, some data, some like process, and therefore is eventually predictable. And so it's not very good for encryption. So these systems need to source actual randomness from a natural phenomena. They've done it with like fluctuations in neon tubes before. Yeah, but they need the real world. Okay, so that's very present tense stuff. I'm thinking about noise and yeah, I'm thinking about noise a lot. So if you know any like physics people at the school that I should talk to about noise, let me know. And then I'll just blast through these. I've been making sculptures as well that go on the wall with these images, printing them on fabric and treating them with resin to create these sort of suspended fluid-like objects in space and in a different material. So kind of having this parallel between the virtual material and physical materials. So that, yeah, we like encounter these images really differently when they are not on a screen. Okay. Okay, cool. And I have some shows coming up on February 15th. I'll have a show with video works and those sculptures at Levitt Gallery on campus. And then I'll be doing a performance piece, kind of playing out this motion capture noise stuff at the beginning of April. So please join. And thank you. Sorry I went a little bit over.
Thanks, Jessica. And our final speaker is Junli Song. She's the Grant Wood Fellow in Printmaking. She grew up in Chicago but lived abroad from 2012 to 2018 in South Korea, England, Italy, and South Africa. Her studies are similarly widespread. She originally majored in economics and international development before returning to her creative path. She completed her MFA at the University of Arkansas with a concentration in printmaking. She's an artist and storyteller working across a range of media from printmaking and painting to sculpture and animation to explore imagined worlds and personal mythologies. As a Chinese American woman, she has undertaken the project of world building to create a space where she belongs and to make sense of the complex, often contradictory realities existing between cultures. Centering around a female reimagining of the mythological headless deity Xingtian as a symbol of resistance, the world created within these images exists as an imaginary realm where the liminal becomes a space of alternative existence. Drawing upon the fantasy and continual self-reinvention inherent within diasporic societies, her work reveals the fluid nature of identity as inherited stories and traditions continually evolve. Please help me welcome Junli Song.
Thanks for the introduction. She has to lower it because I'm so short. Okay, thank you so much for coming, everyone. Like Jess, I'm going to go over some of the work that I came in with, and then I'll move on to my plans for my exhibition in the spring. And so, as Kim just said, my work is mostly revolving around storytelling and world building. And so everything that I create exists within the same universe, which I have named the in-between cosmos. And so it's inspired by this figure, Xingtian, who I found in an ancient text called the Shanhai Jing. And so I named this headless figure Ni Xingtian, and I started creating the world around her. And so I decided to start with this image because it not only introduces Ni Xingtian, but also a few of the key landmarks in my work, which I'll be returning to throughout this talk. And so one of them is this mountain in the distance, which is in the form of a breast. And so this is called the Yifeng Mountain. And the other key landmark that I want to point out are the 4 moons that lie across the sky. So I wanted to jump right in with this installation that I made last February. And so this was for my thesis show, and it was called Death Like Dreaming. I'm starting here because my stories tend to grow one from another, and so a lot of my plans for the spring are actually jumping off of this original installation. And so this installation piece was really centering around the story of the Zhenmusho. And so the Zhenmusho are what I call these sculptures that I create out of wood and painted silks. And they are named after the traditional Chinese tomb guardians, which lie at the entryway of coffin chambers. And so when I was trying to imagine my thesis show, I was also at the same time trying to develop this story of who the Zhenmusho are. And so I'm going to take a few minutes to tell you that story before I move on to my April show. And so I always say that within this creative universe, there's a time before and a time after. And so in the before times, the headless ones, the Nixingtian, they had to partner with a head, who I call toe. And so you can see one of the toe in the upper left corner. But there came a time when one of these toe betrayed his partner. And so he murdered her and tore her apart. And all that remained of her was the single breast, which was discovered by her sisters. And so they performed certain funerary rites, and then overnight, they buried the breast, and then overnight at that site, a mountain appeared. And so this is the same Yifeng mountain that you saw in the beginning. And so I realized that this mountain was not only a mountain, it was also a tomb. And so this is actually how the Zhenmusho came into existence within my world, because I have already made a couple of them, but I didn't really know who they were. And then this realization that the mountain was a tomb sort of led me on the way to realizing that they were my Zhenmusho. And so my narrative process often just involves me asking questions to myself. So my next question was where the Zhenmusho themselves come from. And so I realized that I was continuing to compose them out of fragmented body parts. And so I realized that they must be pieces of her, this murdered Nixingtian. And so there are these fragments of her spirit that are always trying to return and reunite and to become whole again. And so they form new beings, and they multiply, and they recombine. But it's never fully successful because she met this very brutal ending. And so every time these parts of her soul grow uneasy, a new Zhenmusho appears, and then this restless soul has to be appeased. And so there's a ritual that takes place that allows this soul to find some peace and to pass on. And so, as I said, that was the story behind this previous installation. Since that time, I've begun thinking of my installations as narrative chapters. And so for my upcoming show, it's actually a bit of a continuation of that story. So I apologize for these photos. I know it's really hard to see, but if you squint a bit, hopefully you can see that there's actually the Yifeng mountain in the background of Death Like Dreaming. And so it's present there as a negative shape. And so I created it by, pasting these Japanese cloud papers around the mountain. And so in that installation, we were still standing in front of the mountain, at the foot of the mountain. And so for my upcoming installation, I really want us to step forward, or rather to step inward and to go inside of the mountain. And so in Chinese culture, mountains are seen as sacred because they are the connecting point between the earth and the heavens. And specifically in Taoism, there's a belief that inside of the mountain, there's something called a Dongtian. And so a Dongtian is this mysterious gateway into the spirit world. And so my inspiration for this upcoming show is that I want to take us through the Dongtian and to transport us to the heavens. So the next question I was facing was, what would that world look like and how would it feel? So I have two primary sources of inspiration. One was that I spent last spring in Japan, and I'll get back to that soon. But the other was reading Tanezaki's In Praise of Shadows. So I want to take a few moments to briefly talk about this book because it was so pivotal in helping me decide how this world would start to look like. And the key point that struck me from Tanizaki is the way that he emphasizes how Japanese and Chinese cultures value obscurity and subtlety, cloudiness and shadows, over this desire for extreme clarity and brightness that we find in the West. And so what I really love about this text is the way that it unites aesthetics and philosophy, which is something that I'm trying to move towards as an artist as well. And so Tanizaki poses this question of what Japanese culture might have looked like if the West had not essentially taken over the world. And one particular example that he spends a lot of time with is that of electric lighting. And so he argues that electric lighting really imposed this harsh clarity on the society that was not suited to it. And so it really, dispelled this world of shadows that was Japan. And that was Japan for millennia before Western science came into the picture. And so I became really captivated by this idea of resurrecting a world of shadows in my own work. And I had already been really obsessed with shadows, so these are some earlier images. Ever since I started playing with installation and making these sculptures, I really love messing around with shadows and using light gels. At the same time, I have been wanting to move away from the harshness of track lighting. And so after I read Tanizaki, it really gave me the motivation to move forward and to follow those impulses. And so Japan. So I was very lucky to spend a few months there last spring. And I kind of realized that I was staring obsessively at shadows the entire time. And so I thought I'd share a few of my favorite images that really embedded themselves in my imagination. And so this is a short video, but this is upon leaving Todaiji, which is one of the oldest and most significant Buddhist temples in Japan. This was actually following the Omizutori rituals, which themselves are absolutely magical to witness. It happens every year at this temple, and it's a welcoming of the spring. And so the actual ritual involves the lighting of these giant torches, which they then carry up the stairs and across the balconies. So it actually looks like these giant balls of fire that are floating through the air, and they emit showers of sparks. But that's not the image I've decided to show you, right? And so I was just equally captivated by these shadows that were dancing across the walls as we were leaving the temple. This was another wonderful set of images that I saw. And so I went to quite some temples and also exhibitions. So these were some exhibitions of both Buddhist and Shinto art and architecture. And the final little image I wanted to show you from Japan is this, which I looked at every night during all of March. This is from the house that I stayed in for my artist residency in Nara. And I just loved the way that these cutouts in the wood panels projected these beautiful shaped lights across the walls. And so I'm hoping to create a similar effect in my own exhibition. Unfortunately, this project is still very in the rough stages, so I don't have anything physical to show. But I'm trying to create a giant lantern with cutouts, and the hope is that, like those wooden panels, it's going to project these different shaped lights all around the space and to really encompass the entire gallery and to create this world of shadows. So right now, the plan is to make them out of foam, and I'm hoping to cover them with Japanese papers. And I'm looking into trying to get these laser cut. And so hand in hand with the idea of shadows, Tanizaki also focuses a lot on the use of gold in Japanese aesthetics. And so in this dimly lit world of shadows, gold is not purely decorative, it's also functional because it's reflective, right? And so it bounces light. And so he paints this really evocative image of things that gleam in the dark. And so this was really the feeling that I want to capture for my exhibition. And I had already experimented a bit with gold on the floor, so these are from Death Like Dreaming, by applying this vinyl directly onto the cement. When it comes to the gallery at the University of Iowa, I also had a problem to solve because I really dislike the tiles on the gallery floor. And so a lot of people have heard me complain about this, but and so before I read In Praise of Shadows, I already thought, I must cover this floor at all costs, no matter what. And then after I read this book, I immediately envisioned an entirely gold floor, this softly glowing reflective floor. And so that's the idea that I'm pursuing with this installation. And so everything is still being cut, but the basic design is on the right. And so I thought, since the story is that we are now being transported to the heavens, it makes sense then that the sky might be at our feet. And so I decided to make this skyscape on the ground. And so I'm making it mostly out of gold. But as you can see, there's also some silver because it's also an image. So I wanted it to be legible. And so except for the 4 moons, which I mentioned earlier, right, and the clouds, so those will be in silver and the rest will be in gold. And so we'll have this reflective floor that is also a sky. And so these are just a few of the pieces that have been cut so far. So in the center, it's sort of my little map. It's more carefully numbered at the final version, otherwise I would lose track. But it's about, I think, probably 140 or 150 pieces that I'm cutting out. And on the right, you can see that, I tested a few pieces to make sure that they were actually fitting together. And so it's sort of going to be this giant jigsaw puzzle on the ground. I'm also hopeful that then I can reuse it in other spaces, so it's not just this massive undertaking for one exhibition. And so now I had the basics for what the environment might look like. So the next question I was faced with was, what and who is inhabiting the spirit world? And so one of my first ideas was for these these glowing orbs. I'm referring to them as soul eggs right now. They'll probably get a proper name at some point. But, again, building off of the story I just told you, that there's a ritual that helps the souls pass on, right? And so I thought, well, then they're going to enter this spirit realm. But, what happens to them immediately? And so I thought they're not immediately reborn, but maybe they incubate for a while in these soul eggs. And then there was also another fun way to explore another lighting idea and a way to use soft lighting. And so I've been experimenting with using the same silks that I use in my gemmusho sculptures. And I've just been spraying them with a lot of starch spray and hoping that they hold up. It's been semi-successful so far. And initially I was planning to place them on the floor. But recently I've been thinking that perhaps they'll go on the wall instead, because I think it might look a little distracting, I guess, to have them on the floor. And with the introduction of them on the wall, I also think it goes well with the next beings that will be living in this space. So these are new celestial beings that I'm introducing into this world. They're loosely inspired by the Tenin, who are they're celestial beings from Japanese and Chinese Buddhism. And so Tenin are believed to live in Buddhist paradise alongside the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas. They are sometimes referred to as being equivalents of angels, but a key difference is that they don't have wings, and instead they fly by means of a feathered garment. And so I really loved the idea of that feathered garment as an identifier. So in Japanese, they're called hagoromo. There's a very famous no play actually about hagoromo, and there's one of these celestial beings who comes down to earth, and then the fisherman steals her hagoromo, and then she can't fly back to the heavens, right? But in the play, he's quite nice, so he actually gives it back to her when she explains the situation. So I've been playing around with these monotypes as a way to start generating imagery and to figure out what my version of the tenon might look like. And so, they feature a lot of these orchid hand gestures that I use throughout my work. And then there's also this feathered cape that is happening. The tenon also often carry lotus as a symbol of enlightenment. And because I've already been playing a lot with creating my own version of lotus flowers, I decided to have this tenon also carrying one of my lotus flowers. And so these are just some process shots. So you can see in the bottom right corner, my version of the hagoromo. And so it started as kind of abstracted feathers, but I love drawing eyes, so they quickly just turned into eyes. So now they're these feathered eye capes. And so I've been thinking of the monotypes as sketches because I don't really intend to hang the prints themselves. They're more just my way of brainstorming and thinking through what the tenon might look like. And instead, I'm trying to create some kind of, I'm referring to it as a modular collage. And so I'm trying to mix different media and then have it be able to transform from show to show. And so this was just a little experiment that I did in the fall. I called it my impromptu ikebana moment, and it was just using some leftover prints and also these leftover stencils from my monotype process that were just lying around my studio. And so I really enjoy the combination of the 3D merging into the 2D. And so when I install this spring, I'm planning to use many more materials. And so I want to form the tenon directly on the walls, and of course at a much larger scale. And I also imagine that then we would see their reflection in the sky on the floor. And I'm really excited to see what that looks like. And so these are just some of the other materials I'm planning to use at the moment. So I'm playing with some clay. So I would like to do some slab pieces, but then I've also been trying to troubleshoot how to do with clay what I do with my wooden sculptures. So I'm trying to stretch some silk inside of them. So I've been, testing out routing clay with a little hand router, and also various other tools that I've picked up to try to use. So hopefully there will be some 3D elements from the clay. And then I also ordered some really beautiful Japanese papers to cut up and to wheat paste on the wall. And I'll probably also recycle some prints. And I've also been cutting out some leftover pieces from the gold flooring. And so I think I'm mostly going to end there. These are a couple of other of the sketches of the tenon. And yeah, I just want to invite you to come visit the spirit world with me in April and see if these things work out. Thank you so much.
All All right, so we'll take maybe just a 5-minute break as we kind of reset. Please help yourself to refreshments. There's warm spiced cider, cookies, brownies, tea, water. Get something, think about your questions, and come on back in about 5 minutes. So thank you, everybody. I'm going to start our conversation by discussing some similarities or some themes that I see kind of shared in your work, and then I'll open it up to the audience for more specific questions about each of the fellows' work. So thank you all for sharing what you're working on. I think it's very brave to share your work in progress and you're thinking about those projects as they're developing. Some things that stood out to me was the links between some of the ideas that you're working on and the techniques to the history of art at Iowa, from the students to the visiting artists here. So I'm thinking of Anna Mendieta, Namju Pike, which came up in the discussion. What are some of the ideas that have been emerging in your research that have connections to Iowa or artists who have passed through here?
I mean, I've thought about Mendieta a lot. My best friend's a photographer, and she's obsessed with Mendieta, so someone I've known about for 20 years and thought about a lot, and so that's been in my mind. I remember when I first saw Mendieta work, I was thinking about, I used to dig holes and make nests all over the farms when I was tiny. Especially I like to dig them deep enough just so I could see on like insect level. There's so much stuff that I did as a child that I realized was art or performance art that I wouldn't have called it. It just was the weird kid doing shit. And I found a telephone pole on the side of the road when I was small, and I would put it at different points on the farm and sit there all day to just get that perspective. And I'm amazed at things that no adults let me do all these things. But that perspective was really, really interesting to me. Yeah, I want to go to the sites where she did. I've been asking about that, where all of the sites that Mendieta did things. So it might be nice to do something in those locales of what I'm working on. Yeah, that gets us started. Now it's y'all.
Is mine on? I don't know.
What number is it?
Hello? Can you hear me? I think it's... Okay. So I'm thinking of Hans Brader, who started the Intermedia and Sculpture department. I knew about him through one of my teachers in Amsterdam, who was invited by Hans Brader to come out here and teach for a while, I think in the 80s. And just because my practice is so interdisciplinary and I really refuse to land on a medium, just knowing about him and that approach was it's still kind of not so common in art academia. So that made it feel like a welcome place to come and do my practice. I had another thought, but it's now slipped. Oh, I was thinking we did the tour of the Grant Wood studio at the beginning, and there was just one anecdote that has stuck with me, that when he was drafted into the war, his job was painting camouflage on tanks. And I just thought that was so fascinating, because you might have noticed the noise that I'm working with looks a bit like camouflage, but it's computer generated, it's mathematical, and present day camouflage is mathematical. It's not done by hand, which doesn't mean it's not hard to do, but it's just interesting thinking about visual practices, artistic practices, creating material, creating images, creating sounds, whatever medium it is, but that you create it, and how the means of doing so have shifted. Yeah.
I'm so sorry, I really don't have anything for this question.
I put you on the spot like that.
That's okay.
There's something that really came up during your talk, Junli, was the kind of liminality and in-betweenness and the many forms that can take in each of your works, from the process of the many layers of the paintings, the obscuring, the mold in Shea's work, the kind of noise and fragmentation of the face in Jessica's work, and then in your work, the kind of cutting apart, the rebuilding and re-emerging of bodies. How has this kind of liminality and fragmentation of concepts sort of grown, or how did that become something that you all got to in your work?
Okay, I guess I'll start. I mean, I think it was my starting place, honestly, as an artist, and for a very personal reason, which is that I feel my lived experience is a liminal one, just as, you know, a child of immigrants, and I grew up in a household where my dad's Romanian and my mom's Chinese, and then, as you mentioned in my bio, I also lived abroad for many years, and so I've always felt a certain unease and a certain feeling of not quite belonging. You know, in America I feel different because of how I look, but then, you know, even when I lived in Asian countries, then my culture would set me apart, and I would always joke that I've never felt more American than when I wasn't living in America, because you suddenly, you know, all of those differences become incredibly concentrated in the way that you interact with people. And so, you know, it took me a while to decide to pursue art. But once I did, it just became such a natural venue for me to begin investigating those lived experiences that I had been through. And so I feel since the moment I started my MFA, that was the focus of my research, and it continues to be the focus of my research as well.
Yeah, I'm trying to think what the starting point was for me to get into fragmented bodies. I mean, I remember I never intended to be an artist. I wanted to be a dancer, which is another kind of artist. But so I was really, you know, in my body and concerned with practices of the body growing up. And I was a singer and a dancer, but I was not making images or composing things really. But I think, yeah, in some way. It's a bit of an identity experience as well, more of like being a woman in the world, of feeling like a sort of function as an image in the world, and like of being seen, being this sort of source of affirmation or value. And I was a performer literally too. So I think when I studied film in undergrad sort of by accident, because this class I took was Women in Film. And it helped me just like, I was like, oh, you can observe these phenomena in media that are telling us something about our function in the world, and our possibilities in the world. And I can deconstruct it and say like, no, it's not like that. And from a feminist perspective, was sort of a starting point. So then I think taking hold of my own voice, my own image, and working with that through technology, which appealed to my other major, which was math at first, was kind of like, okay, everything can come together here. These like embodied practices with these cognitive processing, and yeah, and I was just like always really interested in psychology as well, and so thinking about how all these things, how we construct this idea of the self and the body, and how could I deconstruct it? Yeah.
And thinking about luminosity, I first read In Praise of Shadows in grad school and became obsessed, and because black and shadows were always what I was into in work. Like when I got a box of crayons, the black was gone, you know, like before you even, the others were, I just always obsessed on the shadows of things. And I love work when it's black on black or white on white, when it's really, really subtle and you have to see it in person. And it's all about optics and light and like really subtlety. That just technically is always really interesting to me. And, you know, it makes me think of, that work is really hard to document and really hard to show. I think when my best work is work that you have to see in person and you've never documented it. And at this point, I've created 140 something fictional characters. And when I did the biennial and did 100, I actually did 106 in that year. And the 6 that got cut were me. I mean, like it was all work that just didn't document well. And anyway, that was really an aha moment where I was like, I cut all the subtle stuff because it just didn't photograph well. You know, it was going to have to be presented. And yeah, that real subtle stuff is subtle luminosity always really gets into me. Yeah. Yeah.
And then I have one question kind of looking forward. At the university there, all the resources and all the labs and things that you can kind of play with, are there technologies or collaborations that you're excited to pursue in the spring that you haven't had a chance to really get off the ground yet?
Yes. Yeah, I love processes. I love machines. So, I mean, I've been working with a lot already with the motion capture studio, but one thing I wanted to get to sooner, but it's probably gonna, as you can see, there's a lot going on already. But in the sculpture facilities, they have a thermoformer, which melts plastic to a form. And Shea gave me a cool idea to use acrylics and print transfer of my images. And so I've been sort of researching and problem solving like another sort of material for my sculpture that that will make sense and that I can give these different forms. Like the noisy videos, I basically want to turn a still from that into a light box sculpture, and I can use the thermoformer to do that. But I might have to wait till the end of the semester. Yeah.
I don't think I have anything particularly technological. I feel like I'm trying to push myself to collaborate with people more. I think it's a real resistance that I have where I always want to make things by myself. But I realize that sometimes I should ask for some help. So yeah, I think it's a bit limited right now this year. I'm already asking for quite a lot by using the laser cutter to cut all of my floor tiles. But I think just in the future, you know, an example that popped into my mind was that when I was thinking about those soul eggs I wanted to make, I immediately actually wanted to make them out of glass. And so I'd love to find a glass collaborator, but then I don't know anyone right now. And so for me, as I said, my instinct is always, how can I make this? So I just immediately thought, what transparent thing am I working with? What can I do with my own hands to create something that might give a similar effect that I'm looking for? But yeah, it's something I'd love to explore in the future, if anyone knows anyone.
Yeah, now you've got it out there, so yeah. Everybody out here keep thinking.
No, there's tons. It's hard to stay on track sometimes because I thought, oh, I'll have time to do some printmaking when I'm here, but we'll see if there's any time for that. Or paper making the same way. I want to spend some time with bird specimens at the Natural History Museum. Yeah, that's probably about as ambitious as I should should be. That was the great thing in grad school. Summer, I did everything in every other department. You know, like I just spent that whole summer, you know, and even the summer after grad school, okay, let's just play with all the toys. Because you don't really realize how few institutions have as much as we have here. So.
Well, thank you. I'm going to open this up to the audience. So if you all have questions that you've been dying to ask the fellows, raise your hand and I'll come by.
Hello. Hello. Oh, hi. It's really quiet. I have a question for Junli Song.
Yes, Leah.
So when you were talking about the feathered angels, whom I love, I've been thinking a lot about like drawing as a mode of thinking. And when you were talking about making the thing and then responding to it and figuring out where in this extended universe it fits in, that was super exciting to me. So my question for you is, do you find yourself, I noticed that those pieces were monotypes. Do you always lean towards monotypes when you're doing that kind of ideating? And if so, is there something about monotype that allows you to have that kind of like free-flowing thought process?
Yeah, I mean, we're in Intaglio together this spring, and so I'm also going to explore a little bit on the plates. But I think the thing with monotypes is that they're so playful for me, and also that I've been starting to work in a very modular way. I feel really since I started making the sculptures, and so the way that I make the monotypes, where I also am cutting stencils and playing around with them, it really leans into that way of thinking. And I remember talking to you about this at the end of workshop that day when I came to give a talk. I was like, what does modularity mean in my process? Anyway, I've made some progress on that question. And so I revisited Byung-Chul Han's Shanzai over winter break. And, he talks a lot about how modularity is a very Asian process of creation. And so it's this very Asian logic, and it's moving against what we really idealize in the West, which is the idea of essence in the original, and instead it focuses on change and process. And so I've really been embracing that approach, and so I'm trying to lean into processes that allow me to continue working in that way. And so with the monotypes, it's just so easy for me to kind of work intuitively, because I have certain symbols and shapes that I like to use and reuse over and over again. And then I can just take them out and play with them and see what starts to happen on the plexi or on whatever surface I'm working with. And so I think in that way it feels more natural than, if I have the etching needle and then I have to sort of just start to think about what I'm drawing. And I think every artist has encountered that fear of the blank page. Sometimes you're not quite sure. But when I'm playing with the stencils, I can always remove something. And so it's so natural, it's so easy. And so, yeah, I think that's why I love that process so much. I'm really obsessed with it. I feel like I've only been doing it for a year, and now it's the only printmaking process I ever want to do. I'm sure it won't be that way forever, but right now it is. So yeah, I completely agree with what you said, though. Yes, thinking through making. Thanks for the question.
Don't be shy.
Hello. I don't know if this is, I don't know if I exactly have a question, but I guess this is something I was thinking about when you were talking, Jessica, about how noise is this randomness or this sort of, I don't know what you said, annoyance or and disturbance. And if what you're conveying is the randomness or the noise, then the noise then becomes the information. And so then it's like no longer the noise. And so then is like the information or your face is then the noise coming from your piece? I don't know.
Yeah, I'm also curious. I'm really just like playing with, because, and like I was saying, there's this contradiction, right? That noise is what you want out, but it also improves the system. And so it's necessary, and the system is dependent on it, and the system can't create it itself. So it's this weird sort of, I don't know, there's like a poetics to that I find really fascinating. And so in my processes, I'm like creating noise in the signal, and then it becomes a new signal. Yeah, I think you know what I'm saying. And I'm still figuring it out, because it's not so much that I like have a claim about it of like we're gonna settle what noise is and what the signal is, but of like what are these ongoing processes as well. And if I just like keep mediating it, keep doing the feedback, keep adding noise, removing noise, like what do these processes do, and what is the thing then? Mm-hmm. And it's me that I'm putting through it. So it's like, I mean, it stops being me so quickly, I feel like. It's like I estrange myself from myself really quickly through these processes. And that's maybe kind of the point, is just a lot of technology right now is pinning down the self and saying like, this is what you are. I see what you bought last week. I see who you're reading, like, and let me just keep telling you that that's who you are, and I see where you are. Whereas I'm like trying to be like, no, I'm noisier than that, and yeah.
All right, well, thank you all for coming out. We still are open for another half hour, so if you have other questions that kind of percolate as you're grabbing some snacks, feel free to mingle with the fellows as they're around. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.